A rescue bobcat came every day just to see my blind dog. What happened next was unbelievable. The only sound of the morning bear was the clicking of claws on the wooden floor. Briggs moved according to a familiar map of darkness. His shoulder touched the table edge. His hip grazed the edge of the chair. He stopped by the armchair, seeking the warmth of Clover, his tabby friend with mottled reddish-brown fur, just like the color of dry autumn leaves. Briggs's tail wagged slightly, but the response was only cold, empty space. Clover was no longer there. The realization struck him fresh each morning as if loss were something new. The cushion where she always curled held no warmth. The air carried no trace of her familiar scent. No gentle purr vibrated through the quiet house. No rough tongue reached out to lick his ear in morning greeting. The emptiness was absolute and unforgiving. He stood motionless for a lingering moment, his cloudy eyes staring into nothing, his body tense with the effort of accepting what his heart refused to believe. She was gone, truly gone, not sleeping somewhere else in the house, not outside hunting, just gone, suddenly. His nostrils flared, a strange, sharp, and stimulating scent rushed straight through the crack of the main door. The smell was unlike anything that usually entered his world. Not the scent of the neighborhood dogs on their morning walks, not the deer that sometimes crossed through the yard, not the raccoons that raided the garbage. This was something wild, something dangerous, something that belonged to places where survival meant constant vigilance, where weakness meant death. Outside, snow fell lightly. White flakes drifted down through the gray morning air in lazy spirals. A gray, limping shadow appeared at the forest edge, moving slowly, painfully through the trees. Echo. Ragged fur covered her lean body in uneven patches. She was painfully thin, her ribs clearly visible beneath her coat, even from a distance. Her front left leg was partially amputated, the limb ending in a scarred stump just below where her knee should have been. Every step she took looked like it was stitched together with old pain, each movement a deliberate act of will over agony. She had survived something terrible out there in the wilderness. Something had caught her, trapped her, torn at her flesh, but she had escaped, leaving part of herself behind in whatever jaws or trap had seized her. Now she moved through the world, diminished but alive, a testament to the fierce will to survive. Echo stopped under the porch, her whole body rigid with weariness. She looked through the glass with golden eyes that had seen too much suffering, too much hunger, too much death. Inside meant possible warmth. Inside meant possible food. She had not eaten in 3 days, maybe 4. The deep snow made hunting nearly impossible for a cat with only 3 functional legs. But inside also meant danger, meant humans who might hurt her, meant traps and cages and no escape. Desperation warred with caution in her thin frame. Briggs rushed to the door, his tail thumping against the wall with heavy, enthusiastic beats, his nose pressed hard to the crack at the bottom of the door. Inhaling deeply, trying to understand what his nose was telling him. The scent was wild. Yes, harsh and unfamiliar. But underneath that wildness was something achingly familiar. Fur, musk, the particular smell that meant feline. His mind, desperate with grief and loneliness, made a connection his heart wanted desperately to believe. Outside, Echo froze completely, every muscle locking, her hackles rose along her spine, standing straight up, making her appear larger and more threatening than her emaciated body truly was. She emitted a low growl that rumbled deep in her chest, building in intensity, not a meow, but a warning, not a plea, but a threat. She was wild. She was starving, but she would fight if cornered. She would use every tooth and claw she had left. Merelda stopped her hands mid-stitch. She put down the ball of yarn carefully on the side table and walked quickly to the window. Her slippers made soft, shuffling sounds on the wooden floor. She clutched the edge of the curtain with trembling fingers and peeked out, not wanting to startle whatever creature had appeared on her porch in the middle of this snowstorm. Under the yellowish porch light, the tawny coat with black spots of the strange beast appeared clearly. The markings were distinct and beautiful, dark rosettes against lighter brown fur, a white bib at the throat. tufted ears. Merelda's heart skipped a beat, then began racing wildly. That fur color, those black stripes, that mottled pattern. In the dim light of early morning, filtered through falling snow in her old eyes, she thought for one wild, impossible moment that it was Clover, the stray cat she once saved in a snowstorm years ago. The cat who had appeared on this same porch, half frozen, barely clinging to life. The resemblance was striking enough to steal her breath. The same reddish-brown base, the same mottled markings that looked like autumn leaves, the same white chest. In the poor light, it could be her. It should be her. Clover had become the guiding eyes for Briggs when the boys started going blind. They never left each other a half step where Briggs went. Clover walked just ahead. Where Clover moved, Briggs trusted completely to follow. They had formed a bond so deep, so perfect, that watching them together made Merelda believe in the possibility of absolute understanding between two souls. His passing due to old age last month had left Briggs lonely in the darkness, wandering the house like a ghost, bumping into furniture he had once navigated so easily, refusing food, sleeping most of each day. The light had gone completely out of him. Could Clover have somehow found her way back? Could death be reversible if love was strong enough? Merelda's logical mind knew it was impossible. She had buried Clover herself. She had felt that small body grow stiff and cold. She had wrapped her in a blanket and lowered her into the earth and covered her with soil. But grief does strange things to the mind. For just a moment, she allowed herself to hope. Merelda unlatched the door with shaking hands. As soon as the door opened, a crack. Briggs squeezed his large body through the narrow gap and dashed out onto the porch. His powerful legs drove him forward with an energy she had not seen in weeks, an enthusiasm she had thought was gone forever. He slipped immediately on the thin ice that had formed overnight on the porch boards. His claws scrabbled desperately for purchase. He staggered in two complete circles, his legs tangling comically beneath him, then managed to break only by bumping gently into a dry potted plant that sat in the corner of the porch. The ceramic pot rocked dangerously on its base but somehow did not fall. He stood up immediately, shaking himself, tail wagging furiously behind him with pure joy. His face turned toward the pillar where he thought the scent was strongest, and he barked a short, joyful woof. The sound was happiness distilled into audio, pure certainty, pure relief. His friend had come home to him. Echo immediately lowered her body, pressing her belly flat to the cold porch floor. Her ears flattened back against her skull, disappearing into her fur. She bared her fangs fully, revealing sharp teeth that had killed to survive, teeth designed for tearing flesh from bone. A deep, threatening growl rumbled continuously in her chest. Vibrating through the air, she was ready to fight, ready to defend herself against this massive threat that had appeared so suddenly. But then she noticed something crucial. His eyes, they were cloudy, milky white, the pupils barely visible behind the cataract fog. They were staring into empty space, looking everywhere and nowhere at once. The dog could not see her at all. He was completely blind, thrashing around randomly, barking at shadows and nothing. He could not locate her. He could not chase her. He could not hurt her. The muscles that were tensed like violin strings, coiled and ready to spring, slowly began to relax. Gradually, the tension drained from her body. She retracted her claws back into her paws. Her ears perked up again, swiveling forward to catch every sound this strange dog was making. The giant threat that had seemed so terrifying just moments ago turned out to be disoriented and harmless. He posed no real danger to her. Merelda now saw clearly what actually stood on her porch. It was still the mottled, tawny fur that had deceived her in the poor light. Still the familiar white bib at the throat that she associated with Clover. But those ears with black tufts standing straight up, alert and wild. Those did not belong to any house cat. That sharp, penetrating, cold gaze with eyes that gleamed like molten gold belonged to the deep forest, to the realm of hunters and hunted. Not Clover. It was a wild bobcat, a lynx, a predator that should be deep in the wilderness hunting rabbits and voles, not standing on a human porch begging for scraps like a stray. Perhaps not just her, But Briggs had also been mistaken about the friend who had just departed. They had both reached desperately for something that was not there, both so hungry for connection, so desperate to fill the empty space that Clover had left, that they had seen what they wanted to see instead of what was actually real. Merelda moved slowly, carefully, keeping her movements small and non-threatening. She quietly placed a tray of meat scraps, leftovers from last night's dinner, at the far corner of the porch. The metal tray made a soft, scraping sound as it touched the wooden boards. Then she reached for Briggs' collar and pulled him gently but firmly back toward the door. The old dog resisted immediately, his body going stiff, his paws planting themselves firmly on the porch boards. He whined softly, a sound of confusion and sadness and desperate longing. He did not understand why he was being pulled away from his friend. Why couldn't he stay with Clover? Why was Merelda separating them again? Merelda's heart broke a little more as she wrestled him through the door, but she managed to get him inside and close it firmly behind them. Echo hesitated for a long time outside. Her body remained tense and coiled, ready to bolt at the slightest movement from inside the house. She watched the door close with suspicious eyes. She watched the curtains fall back into place. She waited several long minutes to make absolutely sure the humans were truly gone, that this was not some kind of trap. Then, finally, she crept slowly over to the food. Her damaged leg dragged slightly through the thin layer of snow. Leaving a small dragging trail behind her, she sniffed the meat scraps carefully, her nose working over every piece, checking for poison, for anything wrong, for any reason not to trust this offering. When she determined it was safe, when hunger finally overcame the last shreds of caution, she began to eat with desperate, ravenous hunger. She swallowed chunks almost whole, barely chewing, eating as fast as her jaws could work. The next morning, Briggs walked out to the porch the moment Merelda opened the door. He did not pause or wander aimlessly as he had been doing for weeks. He had purpose now, direction. He went straight to the empty tray, following an invisible scent trail that only his nose could detect. The smell of Echo's saliva left on the tray was harsh and wild and completely different from Clover's familiar scent. He knew this immediately upon smelling it. This was not his old friend, but it was someone real, someone who might stay if he could make her understand she was welcome. He smelled the tray carefully, methodically, his nose working over every square inch of the metal surface. He was learning this new presence, cataloging every subtle note and variation, memorizing what made her unique. Then he walked deliberately to the nearby pillar that supported the porch roof. He lifted his leg with clear purpose and marked his territory with a long, steady stream. This was his home, his domain, his space. Any creature who entered needed to understand the rules of this place, needed to know where the boundaries were and who set them. After Briggs had gone back inside, moving slowly through the main door that Merelda held open for him with the careful, measured steps of an old blind dog, Echo emerged from the forest where she had been watching and waiting. She had spent the night curled in a hollow tree about 100 yards into the woods. The hollow had been dry but bitterly cold. She had shivered despite her thick winter coat. She was too thin, her body had no reserves left. She desperately needed more food and better shelter if she was going to survive this winter. She cautiously approached the wooden pillar, her movements slow and deliberate and calculated. Her nose, far more sensitive and discerning than any dog's, caught the strong scent signal Briggs had just left. She stopped several feet away, considering this territorial message. What did it mean? Was it a challenge, a warning, a claim of ownership? After a long moment of consideration, she made her decision. She tilted her head and pressed her cheek tightly against the rough bark of the pillar. Then she rubbed hard along its length from bottom to top. Her whole body engaged in the motion, her musk glands working to overlay her own scent on the house dog's territorial claim. 2 layers of scent, one wild and sharp like pine needles and blood, one domestic and blunt like kibble and safety, overlapped at the same point on the weathered wood. A common boundary was established without conflict, without violence, without either of them having to back down. They had reached an understanding through the ancient language of scent marking. This was neutral ground now. This was shared space. This was a truce between two very different worlds. In the following days, a strange habit formed between them, a routine that neither had planned but both gradually accepted. Echo still came for food every evening, appearing silently from the tree line just as the sun began to set and the world turned that particular shade of blue-gray that meant twilight. Merelda left the tray out regularly now, filled with whatever scraps she had. But Echo did not disappear immediately back into the forest after eating anymore. She had made a discovery. There was a woodpile stacked high against the side of the porch, neatly cut logs waiting to be burned in the fireplace. She jumped onto it one evening and found it perfect. The logs were dry, well-seasoned, providing good footing despite her missing leg. The porch roof overhang sheltered the pile from wind and most of the snow. And most importantly, the woodpile was easily 6 feet off the ground, completely out of reach of any dog. No matter how determined, she could rest there safely, watching both the forest behind her and the house in front of her simultaneously, always alert, always ready to flee if necessary. The snow began to get thicker as December deepened and winter truly set in. Each storm dropped another 6 or 8 inches of heavy, wet snow. Then another storm would come and add more. The world became a white maze, paths disappearing overnight, landmarks buried under drifts. It seemed traveling long distances to find food was no longer convenient or even possible for this lame cat. Her injured legs simply could not push through deep snow effectively. Every step became an exhausting battle against the drifts, her stumps sinking deep, providing no leverage. She began to depend more and more on the porch, on the reliable food, on this strange sanctuary she had accidentally stumbled into. Merelda watched through the curtains for hours at a time, standing far enough back from the window that the bobcat could not see her silhouette. She saw the lynx curled up high on the woodpile in a tight ball of fur, trying to conserve body heat. The cat's eyes were still fixed on the door warily, still tracking every movement inside the house, never fully trusting. But her body was clearly exhausted. She was too tired to move further, too cold to care as much about pride and independence, too hungry to be as cautious as survival normally demanded. One afternoon, when pale winter sunlight made the snow sparkle like scattered diamonds, Briggs walked out to the porch. He paused just outside the door, his nose lifted high, sniffing the cold air in that methodical way of his. He realized immediately that Echo's scent was right above his head, fresh, strong, immediate. She was here right now, resting just a few feet away on the woodpile. Without thinking, driven by an instinct he did not fully understand, an impulse that came from somewhere deeper than conscious thought. He turned and ran back inside. His claws clicked rapidly on the hardwood floor as he hurried through the house with more energy than he had shown in weeks. He went directly to his bed in the corner and grabbed something precious, something he had not touched since Clover died, a tattered cloth mouse, barely recognizable anymore as a toy. The stuffing was leaking from old seams. The fabric was worn thin and faded. It was Clover's favorite toy. They had played with it together for years, batting it back and forth across the kitchen floor in games that seemed to last forever. It still smelled faintly of her. A ghost scent that was almost too faint to detect but was there if you knew to look over it. He carried it outside carefully, holding it gently in his teeth so as not to damage it further. He dropped it deliberately on the porch floor, positioning it right beneath where Echo was lying on the woodpile. Then he stepped back several paces and waited, his tail wagging slowly. Hopefully, his whole body quivering slightly with anticipation. It was an offering, a gesture of friendship, a bridge between two lonely creatures. The only way he knew how to express that he wanted her to stay, wanted her to be part of his world, wanted to share what little he had with her. Echo looked down from her high perch, her golden eyes studying this strange gift with intense focus. She could see it clearly from her vantage point, a wet, ragged thing that smelled strongly of dog saliva and old memories and something else she could not quite identify. She hesitated for a long time, weighing risks against curiosity. The dog below had proven himself harmless over these past days, blind, slow, unable to hurt her even if he wanted to. And she was desperately lonely out there in the forest, surviving but not truly living. existing but not connecting to anything or anyone. Curiosity won the internal battle. She jumped lightly down to the porch floor, landing with barely a sound despite her missing leg. She had learned to compensate remarkably well, to shift her weight in ways that made her almost as agile as a four-legged cat. She approached the toy slowly, every muscle coiled and ready to spring away at the first sign of danger. She bent down to smell the sodden mouse more closely, her nose nearly touching its worn fabric. Immediately, her whole body recoiled as if she had been struck. Her upper lip curled back in unmistakable disgust, exposing her gums and the roots of her teeth. Her mouth opened slightly, revealing those small, sharp teeth designed for tearing flesh. This was not prey. This was not food. This was something wet and wrong and deeply unpleasant to her sensitive nose. Without hesitation, acting on pure instinct and revulsion, she swatted the wet cloth mouse aside with a decisive slap of her front paw. She put all her strength into the motion. The toy flew across the porch boards, hit the railing with a soft thump, and fell with a wet plop onto the snow below. Then she turned with all the dignity she could muster and walked away. Briggs heard the toy hit something solid, thinking this was a play signal. He rushed forward with clumsy, puppy-like enthusiasm. He grabbed it triumphantly in his teeth, shaking it once as if it were prey, then carried it back with careful steps. He dropped it excitedly in the exact same spot as before. He stepped back and waited, ready to play again. But he no longer smelled Echo nearby. He stood there bewildered. The realization settled over him like a weight. He picked up the soggy mouse one more time, very gently, and carried it back inside to his bed, where he dropped it carefully in the corner, behind the glass door. Merelda had been watching the entire exchange. She shook her head slightly, a rare smile smoothing the deep wrinkles at the corners of her eyes. The next noon, Echo returned, after eating her fill. She stretched out on the porch steps, letting the weak winter sun warm her scarred fur, drawn by her scent. Briggs navigated outside and carefully lay down next to her. He stayed close enough to feel her heat, but knew better than to touch. Proximity was tolerable, contact was not. Echo studied his clouded eyes with a sharp gaze. Deliberately, she executed a full yawn, exposing lethal teeth. Yet there was no tension in the gesture. Briggs heard the jaw stretch and sensed her relaxation. He whined softly a gentle acknowledgement. Echo closed her eyes, allowing herself to sleep in another's presence for the first time in months. A pattern emerged. If Briggs's ears twitched at a sound, Echo snapped awake, staring where he listened, using her sharp vision to spot threats. Conversely, when Echo tensed, Briggs immediately stood up, hackles raised. He barked loudly in the direction she faced. He couldn't see the danger, but his fierce warning was enough. Briggs was blind but strong, his deep bark and muscles still formidable. Echo was injured and slow, unable to fight, but her vision was sharp. One needed eyes, the other, a bodyguard. Together, two broken pieces formed a whole. Echo still refused to enter, her instincts screaming that the house was a trap. Yet Merelda saw the change Echo's presence had pulled Briggs back from grief. He was eating again, his spirit clear, hoping to offer shelter against the storms. Merelda installed a pet door. It was a silent invitation, not a command. From the forest edge, Echo watched the woman cut the opening, her keen eyes noting the new path into the warmth. Night fell. Briggs slept by the dying fire. Echo approached the new pet door, sniffing the edges. She hooked a claw on the flap. It swung freely. She slipped through, belly brushing the floor. She approached the fireplace. Briggs stirred but remained asleep. Echo circled him, then curled into the hollow between his legs, resting her head against his warm ribs. Hours later, when the embers faded, she woke. She extracted herself carefully and slipped back out into the forest. Echo came daily to eat, sometimes staying to soak in the fire's heat or batted out a ball with Briggs. They learned boundaries slowly. When she left, Briggs waited by the door, tense and whining, focused entirely on her return, watching through binoculars. Merelda saw the truth-ragged scars on Echo's flank and a gait that favored her damaged leg. Unable to hunt fast prey, Echo scavenged deer carcasses abandoned by other predators. She waited hours to ensure safety, then cracked bones for marrow. It was a desperate existence. Then, a brutal winter hit. Temperatures plunged, snow fell in relentless waves. 4 days passed without Echo. The food tray froze. Briggs paced the house, whining. When Merelda opened the door, he didn't turn to the garden but bolted to the woodpile. Empty. Only ice. Briggs sniffed frantically, filtering the cold wind until he caught a faint trace. Without hesitation, he stepped off the porch, sinking chest deep into the snow, driven by need. He walked straight into the forest to find her. Briggs ignored the cold, focused only on Echo. But 50 yards in, the wind killed the scent. He stopped. Turning back, he found the fresh snow had erased his own tracks. Blind and disoriented in the whiteout, panic seized him. He ran in frantic circles, barking broken sounds of terror into the wind. Suddenly, Echo materialized from the storm. She didn't cry out, she simply moved to his right flank, his blind side. Whenever Briggs veered toward a drop-off or thorns, Echo shoved her body hard against his shoulder. Briggs yielded to the pressure, trusting her to steer him step by step. Finally, the yellow porch light pierced the gloom. Echo guided him to the steps, then stopped. She looked up at Merelda, who stood frozen at the threshold, shaking with suppressed sobs. Her job done. Echo turned and melted back into the dark forest. Briggs stumbled inside, soaking wet. Merelda collapsed on the floor, wrapping her arms around his frozen fur, but her eyes stared past him, searching the storm for the ghost that had saved him. That same winter, several weeks after the blizzard incident, when the world had settled into a pattern of relentless cold, Merelda slipped on a patch of ice hidden beneath a thin layer of fresh snow in her garden. She went down hard, fast, her feet going out from under her before she even knew what was happening. Her hip twisted painfully beneath her body as she fell. The impact drove the air from her lungs. She tried to stand, but sharp pains shot through her hip. She collapsed, unable to move. The cold seeped through her clothes immediately. She called for help, but the wind swallowed her voice. The nearest house was too far. Echo, patrolling the forest edge, heard the fall. She rushed to the glass door and roared not a meow, but a wild, piercing scream. Inside, Briggs picked up the panic and began barking frantically. Together, the bobcat and dog created a discordant alarm that carried across the frozen landscape. A neighbor heard the commotion and ran through the snow. He found Merelda behind the garden bed, lips turning blue. He called an ambulance, saving her from hypothermia just in time. Merelda returned 2 days later. Leaning heavily on a cane, Briggs rushed to her, pressing against her legs with relief. Echo sat on the couch, watching with golden eyes, her tail twitching once. From that day, Echo stayed inside more, sleeping by the fire. The house was no longer just shelter. It was home. Clover was buried under the old oak tree. Occasionally, Briggs and Merelda visited the spot. They would stand in silence by the grave, honoring the friend who had given everything. One spring afternoon, when the last of the snow had finally melted and the first brave green shoots were pushing up through the brown earth, when the world smelled of renewal and possibility, Briggs walked to the old oak tree without Merelda. He went on his own, drawn by something she could not see or understand. He lay down carefully on the ground, arranging his old bones with the care age demands, his nose touching the earth where Clover rested beneath. He closed his eyes, breathing in the smell of new grass and wet earth and old memories. Just being present with her in whatever way was still possible. Echo followed a few minutes later. Silent as she always was, she had been watching from the porch, had seen him go. She approached the gravesite with slow, deliberate steps, studying Briggs, studying the unremarkable patch of ground, trying to understand why this spot mattered so much, what made it sacred. Then, after a long moment of consideration and decision, she did something remarkable. She lay down right next to him, pressing her shoulder firmly to his shoulder, her warmth against his side in deliberate, chosen contact. One old grave holding memories of friendship and love and devotion. Two living creatures sitting vigil, carrying on that legacy, honoring it by simply being together in this quiet place. Echo didn't replace Clover, but she filled the empty space. She took up the role of companion and protector, substituting wild independence for gentle devotion. One summer morning, Merelda found a fresh field mouse on the doormat, a clean kill placed precisely in the center. Echo sat on the porch railing, watching. Merelda understood the offering a contribution to the family. She picked up the small body gently and looked at the bobcat. Thank you, Echo. It was the first time she spoke the name aloud, the answer to a cry into the void. Echo blinked slowly in return. The name fit perfectly. Time passed. Briggs turned gray. Echo's limp grew stiff with arthritis. Yet every morning, the two old warriors sat side by side on the porch, looking toward the forest. In spring, Echo resumed her travels, the wild still calling to her. Every afternoon, Briggs walked slowly to the old oak at the forest edge, lying in the shade to wait. Echo always arrived, circling wide through the trees but punctual as the sunrise. It was their ritual. Merelda watched from afar, respecting their sacred space. She never intruded, simply sharing the sunset from her rocking chair. Three souls, a lonely woman, a blind duo, and a lame bobcat. Each had been broken in different ways by different cruelties and accidents and inevitabilities. A reason to believe that life, despite everything, still held beauty and connection and possibilities worth experiencing. In the brutality of nature, in a world where only the strong supposedly survive and the weak perish quickly and without mercy or mourning, they had proven together a simple but profound truth that the world in its noise and rush often forgets. Survival is not reserved exclusively for the strongest, for the fastest, for the most fierce or capable or whole. Survival belongs to those who know how to lean on each other when standing alone becomes impossible. The broken had found the broken, recognizing themselves in each other's scars and limps and darkness and grief and survival. And together, piece by piece, day by day, through patience and time and the simple, profound act of showing up for each other, they had become whole again in the ways that truly mattered. Not perfect, not healed, not restored to what they were before, but whole in their shared brokenness, complete in their incompleteness, strong in their collective fragility. And that was more than enough. That was everything. Every rescue begins with a heartbeat that refuses to give up. We're grateful you chose to listen to this one. If you'd like to hear more stories like this, a simple like or subscribe means the world to us.